A lot of people in my comments appear to be befuddled by the US's and the West's continued and unquestioned support for Israel rather than Palestine, despite events like the calamitous Nakba or the Great Catastrophe of 1948, where 80% of the Arabs in the area were involuntarily removed from the region. And by now, I expect you to know all about the apartheid system in Israel, where the Palestinians, particularly those in Gaza, have very limited freedom of movement, and now we are seeing the strikes on Gaza, which have cost a staggering amount of civilian casualties. I'm sure you've realized by now none of this particularly aligns with modern American Wilsonian values like self-determination and the liberal idea of equality under the law. So why is the US still supporting Israel? Well, quite frankly, in general, for state actors, realpolitik trumps morality, and thus America's current doctrine for the Middle East hasn't really put any kind of priority on human rights. So the current plan is what American foreign affairs academic Walter Russell Mead calls conciliate to evacuate. This comes after 2 decades of failed American foreign policy in the Middle East, fighting with boots on the ground in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. They needed to get out whilst not allowing China and Russia to take advantage of the situation. This basically entails doubling down on support for the 2 most important US regional allies, which are Saudi Arabia and Israel. During the Trump administration, this was seen with the 2020 Abraham Accords, where the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan signed up to recognize Israel. Foreign policy is infamously bipartisan, and this is no exception. The Biden administration continued this doctrine and normalized relations between the 2 most important allies in the area, being Israel and Saudi Arabia. They also reached out to Iran. This has also been referred to as principled realism, which really got started under Obama, where the US gave up high-minded ideals of tearing down dictatorships and nation-building democracies and instead chose the road of appeasing and building rapport with the current ruling elites, with the aim of bringing them over to the US's sphere of influence, downplaying the problems of oppressive dictatorships and human rights violations. And essentially, if the US can stabilize a new Middle Eastern status quo that revolves around Israel and Saudi Arabia, the region will still be able to serve American interests while needing less boots on the ground, and thus supporting Israel and Saudi Arabia is absolutely central and critical right now, and both their human rights violations are simply inconveniences. And if you're skeptical about this, if you have a Wilsonian mindset, let's remember Afghanistan. The moment it was taken over by a non-US aligned group, aid dried up almost instantly, despite the civilians needing it more than ever. If we were to look outside of America, my favorite example is China's support for the hideous military junta in Myanmar. I don't think China particularly likes this regime at all, but they need an ally in the south. But don't be in too much despair if you're a human rights activist. If we look back to the 90s when the US supported the terrible Taliban, the US wanted to work with them to construct an oil pipeline, and they believed they could be coerced into being a stable enough government to facilitate that aim. When their human rights atrocities became too great and undermined stability in the area to serve America's oil plans, the US decided they needed them out, and it was time to nation build. And oh yeah, I almost forgot to talk about Gaza. Where does Gaza come into this? Well, they don't really. Gaza has almost negligible geostrategic interest for pretty much anyone. If it did, it would be Egyptian right now. Thanks for watching.